I'm Erin O'Byrne and welcome to Everything EFL podcast. I'm passionate about serving teachers and I offer training for schools and institutions whose language teachers need a little refresher, a change of mindset and some super practical ideas to put into their classrooms straight away. There is no one-size-fits-all lesson plan, but you've got a friend and support system in me. I can help reduce your overwhelm, give you some teacher inspiration, and improve your work-life balance. How? With some solid advice, takeaways you can try out immediately, and some much-needed teacher love, because your well-being is important too. Are you ready to make small changes one step at a time and remember how amazing you are? Let's go! Hello, you gorgeous teacher. If you're one of my lovely regular listeners, welcome back. If you're a brand new listener to Everything EFL podcast, you are most welcome and I hope you stick around. Are you here because of a recommendation that you know? Does someone you know listen to me? I'd love to know if you're listening on Spotify. You can actually leave me a comment on Spotify, which I've only just discovered. So I'm just going to take this opportunity to personally thank Simona Savino, somebody who goes by the name of Off Sins Bins, not sure what your real name is, sorry, Corinne, Giovanna Bonsignore, and Phil and Sonia. Thank you so much for leaving lovely comments on my Spotify, and if anybody else would like to do that, please do. Not going to stop you. And you can also rate me on iTunes and Spotify. This helps get me noticed. Now, I'm going to start this episode with one of my favourite quotes. Trigger warning, I'm going to use a naughty word. Here we go. Assumption is the mother of all fuck-ups, that's right. And yes, it applies to every situation in life, including English classes. How long have you been teaching? Do you still make certain assumptions about your classes or your students? Have you walked into situations thinking, this will be fine, this will be easy, they'll get it, and then everything just goes tits up? Yep, we've all done it. And it doesn't matter how long you've been teaching, you're still going to do it. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but we're not going to dwell on that now. What we're going to dwell on today is 4 things you should never assume about your students or learners or classes. And I'd love to know whether any of these resonate with you. I'll also try to offer some kind of activity, task, advice, just to try and address these issues. I'm not going to say solution. Everybody's different. There is no one size fits all. So let's go in no particular order. Here are 4 things we should never assume about our students, learners, or classes. Number 1, never assume your students will remember a bloody thing. Generally speaking, you forget almost everything you learn pretty much immediately. Think about, your students and the amount of information they take in one lesson. And if you're in mainstream education or a language school that teaches after they've been to actual school, or even people who work as well as study, their working memory will be full. You might teach adults who have jobs and attend a full-time language course. Again, working memory full. In fact, there are not many situations where students will remember a lot. If you want to know a little bit more about working memory, I have a really interesting chat with Veronica Rogachaya in episode 122. Check it out. What's the solution? Well, like I said, not going to give you one. But first thing, it will never be perfect, but review, repetition, this is, the most important thing. We can do this in the form of short tasks or mini tasks if you have something to review. It doesn't always necessarily have to take long, and the beauty of it is you can spread it out over various lessons. If review is something you forget to do, which is what I've heard from some teachers, especially ones who maybe have less time with their students per week, try to dedicate the first 10 minutes of your lesson of, repeating something or reviewing something, nothing new in those first 10 minutes. And, these tasks don't always need a lot of prep. There are loads of little ready-made activities out there. And then you just have to find different ways of practicing it so that you're context switching, because that's really important. Students need to see language in different contexts, not just the same one over and over again. Do your students hate phrasal verbs and always forget them? One little tip I can give you for review, and again, it's a mini task. You can use the same materials over a few lessons for context switching. Let's say you've done 5 or 6 or even more phrasal verbs, although I don't recommend that. And hopefully you've taught them in context, and you haven't just given them a list. If you have time in your class, obviously explore the collocations. For example, come up with an idea, come up with a solution, come up with a plan. Those kinds of phrases can be very useful. If you're giving, a very common sort of sentence where that phrasal verb is used. Anyway, what you can do is get a piece of paper, love little pieces of paper. I've got a little pencil case that has an inch thick pile of just A4 paper cut into 8. So you've got loads of little pieces of paper. So let's say you're doing come up with, right? So put come up with in the middle. And then divide the paper into, let's say, 4 sections. So you have come up with a plan, come up with a solution, come up with an idea, and then maybe even something like didn't come up with anything. You could expand it to common phrases, not just collocations. So you have a piece of paper divided into 4 sections with 4 different collocations or phrases, right? And in each section, you write a question. So, are you good at coming up with a plan in an emergency? Have you ever sat there thinking about something but haven't come up with anything? Which friend of yours is the best at coming up with great ideas for holidays? Whatever you like, okay? And then let's say you've got 5 or 6 other phrasal verbs where you have collocations that you've explored. So you can have 5 or 6 phrasal verbs, one on each piece of paper, and then divide that piece of paper up into 3 or 4 questions with different collocations or phrases on each one. And then students move from piece of paper to piece of paper with a partner. So let's say they're standing in front of come up with. They choose one of the sections, one of the questions. Are you good at coming up with great ideas for holidays? They discuss it. Their partner choose the same one, maybe. Brilliant. They discuss it. And then they move to the next piece of paper. They have 4 or 3 options for one phrasal verb, but they have different, collocations or contexts. They choose one. They discuss it. They move on. All right. And, maybe they just choose 2 different phrasal verbs to discuss. If you have time, maybe they can go to every single piece of paper and discuss whatever suits you. But my point is, once that time is up, they sit down, they carry on the lesson. And then the next lesson, imagine we go up to the phrasal verb card with come up with. Yesterday, I spoke about my coming up with ideas. Today, I'm going to choose a different question. Are you good at coming up with emergency plans or whatever? I'm going to discuss that one. And then we're going to move to another piece of paper and I'm going to choose a different question to the one that I did last time. So you've got like days and days and days of materials there in terms of 10-minute mini tasks or 5-minute mini tasks, but you can just keep going back to them, leave them on the wall or however you want to do it. But this is a great way to reuse materials, context switch, and review. You're welcome. Number 2, never assume your students know grammar words. I'm constantly surprised, but again, it's my fault because I've taught adults for a long time and, you could say to them, how many verbs are there in this sentence? Or is this a verb and a noun? And a lot of them get it wrong or they just don't know. This is a skill that has to be taught. So again, simple short activities. If you're going to do a text, and again, this doesn't have to take more than a couple of minutes if you're pressed for time. But I'd say, do take at least a couple of minutes to do this and, repeatedly throughout the term or the course, ask your students to look at the first paragraph of the text that you've just read and get them to identify all the nouns or the plural nouns or the adjectives. Or, you could split your group into, okay, you guys find the verbs, you find the adjectives, you guys find the nouns. It's just an awareness raising activity. We're very focused on getting our students to speak. And yes, that is the ultimate goal. But what is also good is, these quieter, more receptive awareness-raising activities. They're just as valuable as getting your students to speak. And they should be repeated again and again. Because going back to my initial point about forgetting, repetition is needed. Number 3, never assume your students will talk just because A, you've created space in your lessons for students to talk, and B, you've created an amazing lesson plan. I've said this a million times. If your students don't trust you, if they don't have confidence, if they don't feel comfortable, they're not going to speak. And unfortunately, there is no short-term solution to this. And if anybody tells you there is, I think they're lying. Now, if you've listened to my podcast before, you shouldn't be surprised that it's all about the process, Think of the first couple of weeks of term, right? Or, if you have a class that isn't engaged, doesn't really talk much, it's like trying to get blood out of a stone. Or, maybe they're at that awkward stage where they just don't want to talk, in front of their friends, speak another language in front of their friends. They need to feel like they have a safe space and they won't be judged. And I think you really have to focus on creating this atmosphere in your class before you try to teach them anything. What? I don't have time for that. Really? I understand, but if you've been doing the same thing year on year and your students don't speak and you haven't taken the time to try and create community in class, maybe it's time to try something different. Take a risk. Chance your arm, and other idioms. There are a ton of podcast episodes that I've done about confidence, community, and all of that stuff. Listen to them. Listen to them. And finally, number 4, never assume your students are going to like you. This does have a slight overlap of the last one, but you have to be flexible and react and respond to the classroom environment. If you go in with an agenda of it's my way or the highway, and you're just not going to get very far. And I understand this is easier said than done, but I've talked about this before, and I talked about this a little bit in my first session of my Methods and Mindset course. This ain't Hollywood. You won't reach every student, or maybe you will. But if you only see them twice a week for an hour, maybe you won't, or it will, or maybe it will take a long time. So my first piece of advice is accept that. Okay, now we can move on. Again, it's all about trust, and I've done podcasts and videos and posts about this. Some students will be in survival mode or defense mode, especially if you know they come from a background of trauma, which a lot of students do. Or maybe they're neurodivergent and they're just used to a certain kind of attitude from teachers getting frustrated with them. You might not ever find out what the issue is, but if you have someone who has what you perceive to be a stinky attitude, get ready for this. I'm about to drop a bombshell. It might not even be about you, but it might. Find out. Never be afraid to chat to a student. And again, there's no short-term solution, but it's about building trust. It's about building rapport, relationship, on an individual level. Now, I witnessed something quite miraculous when I was in French Guiana last year, and I think I've spoken about this before, but I was in a class observing, and I took over the class just for a 10 minutes just to sort of show the teacher a few things. And there was a girl who, she had a really stinky attitude, and her English was probably among the strongest in the class, but she was not engaging. She was sat there, arms crossed, that kind of face that says, I'm not engaged. So I had the students talking, doing some kind of speaking task, and she wasn't really engaged. So I got down to her level and I addressed her directly, and I just asked her opinion on something, or I can't even remember what I said, but I asked her directly with a smile on my face, and she answered, and I gave her praise, and her entire body language changed and her demeanour changed for the rest of the lesson. She engaged, she smiled. And the teacher who was observing me was like, oh my God. And also she's done that more with students who are sort of not engaged or tired. And, she said that, at the beginning of term, she was asking her students to write something down, and one of them had their head on the desk. So she just went up to them and she sort of, oh, hey, how are you? Are you okay? That's one thing you can ask is, are you okay? And then he said something and she was like, yeah, but just, you can write this down. This is grand. And they did. They got their pen. They started writing just because of that little bit of individual attention. It works wonders. So this kind of giving attention isn't about singling out students for misbehaving in front of the class. And, sometimes you do have to do that if it's like put your phone away or something like that. But just make sure you address them by their name. Your voice is low and even, no anger, no emotion. And then just issue your instruction, whatever that may be. Put your phone away, John, or no phones, please, John. Or, John's talking at the moment. You're being very rude. Thank you. And yes, the word thank you can also make a difference because you're acknowledging the fact that they listen to you, they put their phone away or whatever it is. A nod and a thank you. So, look, we could go on. There are millions of assumptions that we all make, but I'm just going to keep this nice and short. I'd love to know which of these assumptions you have made, what resonates with you, and whether you've taken steps to address them, or if you think the advice that I've given you in this episode is useful. If you're a new listener, even if you're not, actually, check out my back catalogue. So, even if you've listened to an episode before, you've probably forgotten, remember, working memory. It's not me judging you. Just scroll down, find it and listen to it again. I know as a teacher, your working memory is chock-a-block. So give your favourite episode another listen. Also, don't be afraid to spread the word and recommend my podcast to your colleagues. This is how I'm going to spread and grow. And if you are in need of some teacher training in your school, my email is in the show notes, or you can DM me on my social medias. I'm available for in-house and online training as well. You can always email me. The address is in the show notes. I'm always happy to hear from you, and, I'm happy to help or support you in any way I can. I love, love, love serving teachers. So as always, have a safe and peaceful week, my darling, gorgeous teacher. Look after yourself. Keep in touch. Share the love. Bye.